Hello, welcome to this McGraw-Hill Education Webinar, Collaborative Problem Solving, Students Talk Their Way to Success. I am Megan, I'm with McGraw-Hill Education, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Before we get started, I want to go over a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being presented in listen-only mode, but you will have the opportunity to interact with our presenters. The first way we want to do that is if you could look at your chat box, and if you could type in the state you are attending from today. So I am in Ohio. If you could go ahead and type where you are. We have fellow Ohioans. Oh, wow, they're all coming in. A few from Indiana, Pennsylvania, quite a few from the East Coast as well. Quite a few Ohioans with us today. Well, great. So if you have a question during the presentation, please utilize the chat box, and I will relay that to our presenters. We will be having a question and answer session at the end, but if you think of it at the time, go ahead and put it in the chat box. I want to introduce today's presenters, Robin Silby and Renee McCown. Robin taught for 36 years as a teacher and math coach in the Montgomery County, Maryland Public Schools. Currently, Robin collaborates with districts and schools around the country, motivating educators and students on the value and power of mathematics. Renee holds a master's degree in education and has over 20 years of educational experience and work. Today, she works with McGraw-Hill Education, serving as a curriculum specialist where she works with educators on a daily basis. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Robin and Renee to get started. Thank you for attending.
Hi, folks. So delighted that you're here with us today. The title of our presentation, as Megan told you, is Collaborative Problem Solving, Students Talk Their Way to Success. As Megan, I'd like to hear about you, and if in the chat box you could just type real quickly, whether you're a teacher, a coach, administrator, or something else, just go ahead and type that in real quick. I know you put your states in, but we'd love to know a little more. So go ahead and thank you. So far we see lots of teachers.
It looks like there's a lot of teachers, yeah, coaches, a couple admins.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I am an author on My Math and Glencoe Math, and I'm a contributor for Number Worlds, another McGraw-Hill product. And I think Megan already covered that I have been in the education world for 42 years, 36 of those with Montgomery County Public Schools in Maryland. I have an ongoing column in the NCTM periodical Teaching Children Mathematics, and the column is called The Coach's Corner. Hopefully some of you have seen it, and if you haven't, maybe the next time you look, you'll recognize my name. And I have a newsletter that just talks about some of the books I've read and some of the places I visit and things I've learned, and a little summary of every column of Teaching Children Mathematics that you can sign up for. You can see my email address right there. I'd be more than happy to put you on my mailing list. It's free and no obligation. Today we're going to talk about Plya's problem-solving stages, and I'll tell you who he is in a minute if you don't know. The standards for mathematical practice. We're just going to spend a couple of minutes on items 1 and 2. The grand majority of the time we're going to talk about collaborative problem solving, which is a problem solving paradigm that I came up with out of desperation, really, because our school's scores in computation were nowhere near their scores in problem solving back in the days when state tests separated those two items out. And so, you know, necessity is the mother of invention. This worked out to be very successful for us. So most of the time I'll be sharing that with you. That will include some student work and some frequently raised issues and all that good stuff. But first I want to tell you about George Plya. Down in the bottom right-hand corner is the little paper or book that he wrote in 1945 called How to Solve It. There are 4 stages that Plya talked about: understand, plan, solve, and look back. And I want you to think back to your own classrooms when you were growing up, and think about what you remember thinking about in problem solving? Did your teacher stress that you had to understand the problem, had to develop a decent plan, or did they tell you just to solve it, or did they tell you to really focus on the reasonableness of answer? And what I'd like for you to do is to respond using the poll question. So you're going to show 1, 2, 3, or 4. I think that, yep, there it is. If you would just click on 1 if the focus was understand, 2 if the focus was plan, 3 if the focus was to solve the problem, and 4 if it was to evaluate your problem for reasonableness. Please go ahead and do that for us, and I'll tell you how they go.
Yeah, Robin, I'm starting to see them come in, and overwhelming majority is choosing number 3. By far, the largest percentage there, about 90% are choosing 3.
Well, it's no surprise. I would say they are consistent with pretty much everybody else. You can see that I kind of predicted that. We were really taught to rush to solve. And it was one of those things, if it's in the middle of a multiplication chapter, I guess I should multiply. So what we found out, Joe Bowler, who is a fabulous researcher out of Stanford University, wrote this great book, as I've shown you in the corner there. And she said in her book, the 4 stages of Plya's cycle are neglected or missing in the work of low-achieving students who would more typically rush into answering problems without planning systematically, neglecting to use key strategies, and finishing when they found an answer without stopping to consider whether the answer was reasonable. So in fact, they do everything but. They're really focused on solve. What we have found out, though, the research has been done, is that if a student understands the problem, they have an 80 to 90% chance of computing it correctly and getting the problem right. So my next question to you that I'd like for you to put in the box, you didn't know I was going to put you to so much work, huh? So I'd like for you to respond with your best guess of a percentage of the time that the kids actually understand what the problem is asking. Please go ahead and put that in the dialogue box, in the conversation box. Just a number, between 1 and 100.
Oh, I'm curious to see what the responses will be.
It looks like we have 10 to up to 65%. It looks like we're ranging around between the 30 and the 50% on a whole.
Yeah, I'm seeing them too, and actually somebody hit it exactly on the head. It is 33%. Only about a third of the time do kids really understand. And I see that all of the folks pretty much agree with me that's, and with everybody, the researchers, that's the main issue. It's that understand part. And asking the kids to paraphrase is one really good way to do that. So for each one of Plya's 4 stages, I have pulled just 2 questions. There are many, but I've pulled my 2 favorites for each one. The most important, and that's why it's in bold, is in the understand step, asking kids how to restate that problem in their own words. If you say, well, what is this problem about? Lots of kids will just read it to you again. Nope. We want you to tell us in your own words, and hopefully without using numbers. And I'll explain that a few slides down. And then secondly, what you need to find out and how you can use what you know to find out what you need to find out. In the plan step, it's which strategy you'll choose to solve. We teach a lot of strategies, drawing, solving a simpler problem, working backwards. And separate from that is which method. Are you going to do this one mentally? Are you going to draw some kind of a picture, paper and pencil, calculator? And why did you choose that? In solve, it's which strategy you executed. And maybe you started down one road and decided, nah, that doesn't work. Let me try a different one. And then actually thinking about the purpose of each step of that problem-solving pathway. And finally, that look back. How can you tell if your answer makes sense? and what you learned from solving the problem, because you want to be able to use what you learned next time. So the standards for mathematical practice are part of collaborative problem solving, which we're going to get to in just a moment or two. The two standards that I think stand out the most in this paradigm is making sense of problems and persevere in solving them, and standard 3, constructing viable arguments. Standard 1, if you take a quick look at this one, is really straight down Plya's problem solving, explaining to themselves the meaning, making conjectures and planning a solution, monitoring and evaluating progress, and then looking back and thinking if it makes sense. Standard 3 talks about constructing viable arguments so that when we get to the talking part of the collaborative problem solving, you can actually see that the kids have to explain what they're doing, justify their conclusions, listen to each other, and learn from each other. And finally, productive persistence. That is the union of tenacity and good strategies. Just like if you're doing an ice skating routine, you want to make sure you're doing each part correctly before you practice it 1,000 times. We want to make sure that the kids are solving problems in the best, most efficient way, and then give them lots of practice to do that. So collaborative problem solving can be used in K-12 classrooms. As I told you, it aligns with the standards for mathematical practice, and it builds productive persistence. But I think most importantly, it's really centered around the kids, so that the teacher is merely the facilitator. It really embraces mathematical practices 1 through 3 and productive persistence. And as we work through this one and we do the simulation, I'd like for you to be thinking in the back of your minds about how those things that we talked about before are really capitalized. So here's the part with the lesson simulation. Please grab a pencil and a little bit of paper because you're going to be solving a problem. But put that pencil down because we don't want to rush to solve on this one. We really just want to concentrate on that understand and plan step prior to solving. What we're going to do now is an actual simulation of what you would do with the kids. And the papers you're going to see reflect the very first time that I did this back in 1997. Because I want you to see what it looks like at the beginning, since if you do this, you will be at the beginning. Oops, understand. So again, please put the pencils down. The first part of understand is for the kids to think what the problem is about. I'm going to show you the problem now, and don't have to worry about copying it because I'm going to show it to you several times throughout the presentation, so you don't have to worry about remembering it. For now, I'm going to give you 10 seconds, right after I show it to you, 10 seconds of silence so you can read it and think about how you would want kids to paraphrase this problem without using numbers. So once the kids have had 10 seconds to think about it on their own, and for you, you might want to give your kids somewhere between 15 and 30 seconds. The second part of understand is to have the kids share ideas in small groups. Again, we want them to paraphrase without using numbers. For one thing, that really focuses the kids on the comprehension of the problem, and it also works for algebraic reasoning. We don't want kids to get nervous about the numbers and shut down. And once they get to solve the problem, they're able to think about the problem itself and what the situation is, and then it doesn't really matter what the numbers are. In fact,
can I jump in for just a second, Robin?
Yeah.
Yeah, something that I'm thinking about, even just to look up on the screen and to see the words small groups. You know, that alone is a huge shift when we think about math. The math classroom is starting to look so much like the reading classroom, and I'm sure most of our callers that have joined us today, the teachers that are with us today, have the luxury of teaching all of the content areas, and that includes reading. And so, you know, when we think about even solving this problem and that students are not working any longer at their desk independently, that they're partnering up, they're working in small groups, Would you say that that is a habit, when we talk about these students changing their habits with the mathematical practices, teachers, we're changing our habits as well. Is that right?
Yes, and that's really important to release the responsibility to the kids. You will also find that this problem-solving paradigm marries ELA and math because as it unfolds, you will see that we're going to be asking kids to write about their responses, how they found their answers, and they will be creating not just a first draft, but a second draft. And it's that second draft that's really magical, as you'll see in the kids' work. Okay. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go to the plan, and when we get to the plan, again, I'd like for you to take a look at this slide and think about how you would want kids or how you would solve this problem. So just take a moment and think about how you would solve. Please do not solve yet. I will give you time to solve later. And remember, we want the kids to focus on the understand and plan steps. So the first part of this plan step looks an awful like the second part of understand. We want the kids to share their solution pathways in small groups, and we also want them to share their solution pathways without using numbers. The reason we want them to do that is if we are talking about Alan, Ben, and Carrie, they're going to say, well, we want to add these three numbers together, instead of saying, well, we need to combine all of we need to combine all of that money and whatever happens, or we need to remove some of it from one kid to another kid and add to somebody else. We want them to be able to use the math terminology, find the sum, divide to find the average, which they won't do if they're just talking about the numbers. Once the kids have done, as the kids are working in small groups, it's the teacher's job to circulate and listen to the kids' ideas. They will find that group mates offer validation. Oh, gee, that's what I was thinking. Or here's a different idea. And the kids that really have no idea where to begin get ideas from their group mates.
I think that's one of the largest benefits right there, what you just said, Robin, that kids who struggle or just may need some support getting started find it in collaborating with their peers and hearing what they have to share before putting anything down on paper. That's just so helpful to the child's end result, to achieving that success that we're looking for in the classroom.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Renee, because this really is a very inclusive model for the kids. So a student who really doesn't know where to begin has an opportunity during the understand step to hear from the other kids what the problem is about and to refine that until it's well done, and then to hear from the other students what their plans are for solving. And only then do they actually, after this plan step, then that's when they get to solve. And by then, a lot of kids have caught on, and they're able to persist and persevere through solving, where, without doing something like this, the rushing to solve times that we had, kids just don't necessarily do that.
Sorry. Go right ahead. No, continue.
Okay, so the second part of the plan is to collect ideas from the class and to obtain a collection of everybody's idea. Now, you'll see that note at the bottom of the screen, arranged for students to share from the least to the most easily understood pathway. Here's what I mean by that. If you think about that problem, one way to solve it would be to add and subtract, just to take money from Alan and Ben and give it to Carrie. And yet there are other ways. There are ways using division. Well, a kid that can't divide, if the first kid that shares says, well, first I found the average, that student is going to think, okay, never mind, I can't do it. But if the first kid who shares says, well, I'm going to borrow from Peter to pay Paul here, I'm going to take money from Alan and Ben, they go, oh, wait, that's just addition and subtraction. I can do that. It's much more inclusive of the kids, and we really want to build kids' confidence and make them think that they can do it. And one of the things about differentiation in the Universal Design for Learning, UDL, is that there should be multiple ways for multiple entry points. That's one of Carol Tomlinson's big hallmarks of differentiation as well. And this has a lot of different entry points. So when you look for problems, that's one of the characteristics that you're looking for. I've given you an example here. Notice that there aren't any numbers there, except for the 3 people. Marilyn Burns wrote a wonderful piece in Ed Week about a year ago, and she said, one way of engaging kids in math is for teachers to think about leading classroom discussions in mathematics as they often do when teaching language arts. Probing students' thinking during math lessons is valuable, so that the goal is not only getting correct answers, but also explaining why answers make sense. And I think, go ahead, please.
I was just going to add on to that, and being a teacher, and you're a teacher as well, and having taught reading for many years, it just reminds me of the shift in reading now, where we give students more time to linger with the text and to read and then reread. We're just doing the same thing in math. Just
exactly.
giving them more time to read the problem, reread the problem, and make sense of it.
Exactly. And if you look at the national assessments, they require kids to explain their thinking. And so this really prepares them for that. So now we move to the solve step. And we ask kids to solve the problem independently and to explain their solution strategies and justify their thinking in writing. And here, once again, is the problem. So let me leave it up here for a few seconds so that you can go ahead and solve it. I'll stay quiet. When you finish, would you please just put a comment in the chat box that says that you're ready, or if you want to put the answer, or I got it, anything you want to show that you're ready to move on, please. And I'm just waiting another minute or two, second or two, I should say. Take your time, folks. They're coming in now. That's great. All righty. Looks like we have a lot of people that are ready. So here we go. As the kids solve and they write their paragraphs, the teacher circulates and approaches one of the students who have done a pretty good job and quietly says, would you like your paper to be the anchor paper for the whole class that basically personifies a perfect full credit response? And if so, would you be willing to share verbally, orally with the class? When couched that way, I've never met a kid that says no. So the rest of the class has their rubrics next to them, and that volunteer shares with the class. The first read-through, classmates simply listen, and the second read-through, they're listening while looking at the rubric, and they're getting ready to score, and they show their score with their fingers. So if let's say it's a 2-point rubric like Park has, if they think it's a full credit response, they'll hold up 2 fingers. When the teacher says go, then the kids hold up the number of fingers. Then the teacher begins a discussion, usually with, okay, you gave this a full credit response. Why did you give it a full credit response? And the kids, those students kind of build that child, that volunteer up and tell them, well, they did this, they did this, they did this. And then the teacher says, all right, if you didn't give it a full credit response, what suggestion would you make? This little girl's name is Asya. What suggestion would you make to Asya to make her response a full credit response? At that time, you say, all right, boys and girls, look at your papers. Do you need to make that upgrade when you write your second draft too? Here is the rubric.
Every student stays actively engaged in this process, even if you weren't the student to share. Is that,
Yes,
that's a wonderful way to keep every student focused.
That's right, because number one, they have to vote, so they have a vested interest in it. They get to share their ideas. As a class, they collaborate to create this anchor paper. And people ask me, well, do they just read it, or do we put it on the Elmo or on the smartboard? We just read it out loud, and we did that because we wanted the response in words to be strong enough for kids to understand. But there's no reason why it can't be up there visually as well.
Sure.
If you notice that this response begins with the question answered clearly and completely in a topic sentence, and then the rest of the paragraph supports that topic sentence with a correct solution, good math terminology, a step-by-step explanation, and then a check. You may have your own rubric. Any rubric is fine. I've shown what the full credit response is that we used. Here was Asya's first draft. You'll see her second draft along with a few other kids in just a moment. But if you see that it says, I got the answer by at least subtracted, well, when she read that aloud, it didn't really make any sense. So somebody raised their hand and said, well, I think what you're saying, well, what are you saying? And she said, well, I added and subtracted. And so I said, okay, well, Asya, you get to decide whether you want to change your second draft, and boys and girls, read yours too and see if there's a part in your explanation that needs to make more sense than it does. If you look down at the bottom, it says Ben gave Carrie, and underneath that, there's a little circled thing that says the answer goes, and the part that you can't read says first. And so you'll see in her second draft that she moved that sentence to become her topic sentence. Joe Bowler, again, the person who wrote What's Math Got to Do with It, in peer assessment, students are often better able to hear criticism from their peers than from a teacher, and peers usually communicate in an easily understood way. It's also an excellent opportunity for students to become aware of the criteria against which they, too, are being judged. You would be surprised, well, maybe you wouldn't. I think you probably know how critical kids can be of each other, but how they do rally behind that person to create a really spectacular exemplar. So now here is the reflect step. And after that first draft, and Asya has shared her paper, and we've made it so that we love it, we want all the kids to think to themselves, well, did I answer the question? Did I solve the problem, and did I answer the question? And is my response completely and mathematically correct? Bear in mind that at this point they actually know the answer to the problem. It's been solved, and Asya shared it. So what we're really practicing here, in addition to solving the problem, is being able to articulate clearly your thinking, your reasoning.
And how about also, Robin, being able to go back and determine where you may have erred and to self-correct, as opposed to how often in the classroom is the answer just marked wrong and then we move on. But now you're giving students yet another rigorous task.
Yep, and you will see the miraculous second drafts in just a minute. I'm so glad you mentioned it. So the second part of the look back here is that all kids write a second draft, and they check it against that rubric one last time. And I even encourage kids, if they want to share it with a partner, because I want their best work. Now, some people say, well, how come you have to make a second draft? And I once had a little girl named Miranda that was near perfect, and she said, Mrs. Sylvie, I'm satisfied with what I have. And I walked over to her, read her response, and I said, you know what, Miranda, your first draft is great. You really don't need a second one. Well, folks out there in the audience, I bet you can figure out what happened next. All the kids raised their hands. Now, I don't need a second draft. I'm fine just the way I am. So from then on, I said, well, I think I really want everybody to make a second draft anyway. So here is the problem one more time, because I want you to look at it in the context of the kids' work. And here we go. Here was Asya's first draft, and here is her second draft. It's clearer. She's put the answer right there as the topic sentence. Her explanation is much more logical and easy to follow. I'm just reading her part of the answer. I got the answer by adding and subtracting. For Alan, I subtracted 10. I added 1, 2, 4, and 3. For Ben, I subtracted 3. I added 3 ones. For Carrie, I added because she has less than them, and if I subtract it from her, we'll never get to the right answer. So Alan and Ben together get Carrie $13, and you can see that she's made a check because that was one of the requirements. Alan is an ESL student who was very good in math and actually very good in reading and writing, but had very low self-confidence. You can see the frustration on this paper with all the erasure marks. He started and stopped and started and stopped. Well, when he heard Asya's response, he found out that he had solved it correctly, but he did it a different way. Had I just collected first drafts, this is what I would have gotten. Here is Alan's second draft. A drastic improvement. At the top, it shows that he added the 3 numbers, found the average, and then subtracted. And if you were to read his narrative, you would see that he explained pretty well. Couple of grammatical errors, not too bad. Remarkable.
That is remarkable.
And now for the third child, John. I'd like to read his response. It was unfinished. He just wasn't able to complete that, and he got hung up. First, I made Alan, Ben, and Carrie each have $25. Then I found out how much extra money by doing 16 plus 23, and the extra money was 39. Next, I did 39 divided by 2 and got 1950. So folks out there in the audience, anybody want to put a comment in the chat box about what John did incorrectly? He was in a great place, and then he kind of went south. Anybody know? Please go ahead and type in the chat box. Excellent. I already see a couple of answers. Beautiful. John divided by 2, but there were 3 kids. And once he made everybody have $25, he had to divide all that extra money by 3 for the redistribution. This was a pretty creative way to solve this problem. Anybody out there have a different one? Okay, so John raised his hand and he said, Mrs. Silby, I know what I did wrong now, so could I fix it? And I said, well, absolutely, that's what the second draft is all about. So you see, in addition to his work being a lot neater, his second draft clearly explains what he did. I got my answer of 10 and 3 by first making Alan, Ben, and Carrie have $25. Then I found the extra money by doing 16 plus 23, and the extra money was 39. Next I did 39 divided by 3 and got 13. Next I did 25 plus 13 and got 38. Next I have to do 48 plus 38. You see what happens. He explains all of it.
You know, all of these different examples coming to light in the classroom, it's a great way to drill home for students that there's more than one way to solve a problem. And, Robin, even while I was sitting here working on the problem, I came up with one way, and then with more time, I decided to move forward, and I came up with yet a second way to solve the same problem.
Wonderful.
And that's what we need our students to do.
Exactly. Exactly. So now the teacher has collected all the papers and scored them, but before she returns the papers to kids, she or he needs to think about the patterns and the instructional implications. Well, as I told you, this is the first time I'm showing you papers from the very first time I tried this model, and I noticed two things. Number one, the kids weren't using math terminology. I did this, I did that. They didn't say I added, I divided. That was one thing. They didn't put their topic sentences first, and they wrote a lot of run-on sentences. So there were a lot of things that I knew I needed to fix moving forward. So I'd like for you just to take a moment and think about, if you would, write in the chat box if you want to, evidence you observed or experienced in terms of mathematical practice 1, making sense of problems and persevering in solving them, mathematical practice 3, constructing viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others, and 3, productive persistence. And while you're writing, I want to say that one of the other things I noticed that first time is that kids were got pretty good at explaining what they did, but it took me another year, and I don't have time today to show you the very same kids the following year. We worked on why they did everything. So they had to justify, I divided because, I found the average because. And of course that made all the difference. That was a year's growth. And that addressed mathematical practice 3. So a few frequently raised issues here. One is that the process takes too long. It does the first time through take about 45 minutes, and then after that it takes a little less. But when you think about what we're doing here, when you think about the writing and all of the wonderful discourse and the multiple pathways through a complex problem, it is a good investment of time.
I think sometimes we feel like we have to rush through 20 problems because there are 20 problems on the page in the book. However, a real easy practical tip is just to reduce the number of problems and to give ourselves as educators permission to say, we're just going to work on 3 problems today, but we're going to spend the time going through this process. It's going to pay off in the end. What do you say about maybe scaling back the number of problems?
Exactly. And that's the whole point. Sometimes you're just going to spend a day on a single problem or 2, and
Sure.
That's really okay. I want to go back to this previous slide because a couple of people, sorry, one more. Let me just run back one more real quick. Some people did respond. One person said that somebody identified the mistake and asked to correct it. That is an example of productive persistence and perseverance. And that the group work allows kids to teach each other, and kids learn from each other as well. And some kids who may not have been able to respond independently are able to have that success through collaboration. So those of you who wrote some comments about the evidence of these practices in productive persistence, I very much appreciate your thinking seriously about it. And the rest of you, maybe you're shy, but it's okay. I'm sure you're thinking about it too. Next slide, please. Oh, here we go. This problem is too simple or the problem is too complex. Well, I think that when you're teaching this model, because you're asking them to do more writing than they may typically do and more justifying, you may want to begin with a problem that's just a little simpler, a little more easily accessible, so the kids can focus on the process. And then you bump the rigor of the problem up once the kids understand the process and become comfortable with it. And the third one, students can't write 2 drafts on an assessment, so it's not going to work. Well, what happens is that there are common errors, such as the topic sentence and the math terminology and the run-on sentences. I saw that over, and the inability to be able to justify your thinking with basically a proof in a way. What happens is that in time, kids stop making those errors because you're creating the anchor papers, and kids know they're accountable not just to you but to each other. And so the distance between the first and second draft really dwindles, so that in not really very much time, kids are able to write a second draft on their first draft. Their first draft becomes a good final draft. What I want to do right now is turn it over to Renee, and she's going to tell you a little more about where you find these things. Renee?
Oh, I'm here, Robin. I thought you were saying more. Thank you. Okay. Yes, let's talk about where we would see evidence of math talk in McGraw-Hill, My Math. And, you know, when I'm talking to teachers, I always ask them, you know, where is math? And math is, in fact, where? It's everywhere. And that's the answer to this question. Where is the math talk in McGraw-Hill, My Math? It is everywhere. It's throughout. There are really ongoing opportunities to have students talk about the math that they're learning and that they're doing in My Math. And one of the resources that's just a favorite among teachers and students alike would be the real-world problem-solving leveled readers. They're available in English, of course, but also in Spanish, and a collection of the level readers we have available for every single chapter. The beauty of the level readers, as you can see here on the slide, is that it's just one title written on 3 different levels. And the level readers make connections to math and social studies and math and science. And so students really do see that math is everywhere. When students look inside of those real-world problem-solving level readers, they're going to see that the text is all of the same, the content, so it's the same content, same concepts, same application. And so the beauty is that when you bring your class together for those discussions about the math, every child is empowered to share. The problem solving is coming up. The problem solving is going to come up when students get to the very end of these readers and they've read the selection. You'll encounter we went one too fast. You'll encounter a real-world problem-solving leveled reader teacher's guide. And that real-world problem-solving teacher's guide has a lot of independent research and writing activities, but also it has opportunities for students to answer real-world problem-solving questions. And as you look here, you can see that they have to justify and explain their reasoning, their answers. And this goes back to, Robin, just what you were talking about earlier, how important it is for students to come together, to collaborate, and to have to explain how did you arrive at that correct answer, because we know it's not enough anymore just to have the correct answer. You have to be able to explain it. So this is really a valuable resource that comes with My Math. As we move forward, in addition to, and I'm hitting my next button, so in addition to the real-world problem-solving level readers and that teacher's guide, there is a solutions worksheet. And Robin, you were talking about a pathway, and you made mention of Plya and that planning systematically. You know, this is such...
And here it is.
Here it is. This is such tremendous support because students have to start off identifying the problem. You know, what do I know? What do I need to find out? what strategy can I use? And in my math, they will learn multiple strategies. The challenge here is to identify an appropriate strategy. And then how do I model the math? And you were talking about the different tools. But I love that last question at the very end. It's, is my answer reasonable? To which every child I've ever taught would answer what? Yes,
yes,
of course. And that's why we ask them why. Because that gets to the heart of the practices, where students have to be able to justify again and explain their reasoning. And so if they can do that, then they're well on their way. So that solutions pathway worksheet, it's right there, comes with the problem-solving readers.
Mm-hmm.
As we advance one more slide, we're going to see that inside of my math, there is the investigate and model step. The teacher has a 5-step instructional plan, and the second step is to investigate and model. So I have a question, and those who are with us can just kind of answer this mentally. No need to type in the chat box, but think about this. How important is it for your students, the ones that you teach today, to use concrete manipulatives to help to deepen that conceptual understanding, to start off with a hands-on experience? You know, we know that we have to eventually move them from the concrete all the way to the what? To the abstract.
Exactly.
And yes, and in my math, every single lesson begins with that hands-on experience using those concrete manipulatives to deepen conceptual understanding, beginning with a discussion prompt that leads students into exploring, modeling, and extending. As we continue and move forward, you're also going to see math talk opportunities right at point of use, those mathematical practices. They are, again, on the pages of the student book. They're on the pages of the teacher's edition. And as you look at this problem, right over there to the side, you're going to see in blue a discussion prompt. But there in magenta, the magenta type, that is support for the teacher, guiding that discussion, and it goes hand in hand. It is directly aligned to that exercise in the student book, so in the interactive work text. So many opportunities, again, for students to talk math. You'll see it, Teacher's Edition, interactive work text. Continuing forward, as we were talking about the interactive work text for students, it is really called out front and center opportunities to talk math. So you see that right here. And as students work through that 4-step plan, and you were talking about planning to solve a problem, we're going to hear them verbalizing their responses as educators, as teachers in the classroom. And this is just an ideal time as a teacher is walking around in the classroom, listening in, to really gauge whether or not students have a firm grasp on that lesson concept. And so talk math you'll see there as well. As we continue talking about all of the wonderful resources in My Math, there's also the interactive guide. Now this interactive guide, many may not have seen before. It was created especially for English language learners, but it is perfectly fine to use with all students, as all of our students need to learn the language of mathematics.
I use it all the time, particularly with the kids who need additional reinforcement.
Oh yeah, okay, yes, and it's great for our struggling students, but
yep.
and again for all students. You know what a lot of teachers say, Robin, that they like about this is the mathematical practice activity that's at the beginning of every chapter in this book.
Right.
That activity has students from the very beginning restate the mathematical practice in their own words. And, you know, as you were talking about them taking those problems and restating them in their own words, this is what our English language learner students are doing. And with the language barrier, it's even that much more important that they do this. And when they restate it using an I can statement. And
exactly.
that helps to further personalize the learning for those students. So, I mean, this is just another great resource as well in the interactive guide. Finally, in My Math, at the very end of the chapter, every chapter in My Math begins with an essential question. And students build on that essential question in each and every lesson. They're constantly being reminded of it and talking about it. But then finally, when they come to the very end of the chapter, it's time to reflect. And we know with all of our new high-stakes testing, we have moved completely away from multiple choice. And students need to demonstrate their understanding with multiple representations. So as you look at this one, let's just look at this reflect page.
I'm just crazy about this page.
I love it. Yeah.
All that white space and places for kids to think and write and talk first, I think.
It's time for them to write. We have to get our students talking math, reading math, writing math, and you said it earlier, even drawing the math. That is so key. And so here we have our essential question. And we're not going to just have students come back and, answer the essential question. They're going to give real-world examples. Use that vocabulary, the language of mathematics that we've said time and time again. It's so important. Model the math. And then finally, they are going to, at the end, definitely write an answer to the essential question. And so if the teacher really wants to be assured that students have understood that concept, they will know when they come to this reflect page. It's awesome.
Exactly. Ladies and gentlemen, it's come time for you to put into the chat box any questions that you have. I see a couple that I would like to just call attention to. One person asked why we would worry about grammar or run-on sentences during math class, and I wouldn't say worry is necessarily it. I wouldn't say that I would give a student a lower score, but this is another opportunity for kids. Many elementary school teachers are self-contained in that they teach math and ELA and everything else all day long, and so I'm not going to hold them accountable, but as a teacher, when I look and I see that that's what their responses look like, perhaps during ELA time, I might know that I have to focus on writing complete sentences and avoiding run-on sentences. It doesn't need to take place right there at math, but it's something to be cognizant of as we look at those papers. So I'm so glad that somebody pointed that out. And somebody else mentioned the beauty of mathematics and not just application, and so that kids don't question, when am I ever going to use this? And I think that problem solving is a wonderful outgrowth of those applications, and the more we can make that math real and take it out of the classroom, the more our students are going to appreciate what they're learning.
Absolutely.
Any other questions for us? Please type them into the chat box. Well, you can keep typing, and I'll just move on to the next slide. This is my contact information. That's my email address. You saw it at the beginning. It is right here at the end as well. I am giving you my cell phone number. I would absolutely love to talk to you if you have any questions about this model and you try it and you run into something that you question, or if it's just fabulous and you can't wait to tell me about it, by all means call me or send me an email. And Renee, would you like to share your contact information with the folks today?
Oh, well, absolutely. If anyone would like to get in contact with me, my email address is Renee, R-E-N-E-E, .mccown, M-C-C-O-W-N, at mheducation.com. So Renee.mccown at mheducation.com.
Hi, Renee and Robin. We had a question just come in. It's coming from Connie, and she was wondering, how is this simplified for kindergarten students as they might struggle with the writing piece?
Great question, Connie. We do it with kindergarten kids, and the kids that cannot write sentences dictate them to a teacher or a parent volunteer or a paraeducator, or they draw a picture to show what they are thinking. Excellent question.
A lot of drawing in my math for kindergarten students as well.
I think that concludes the questions that have come in. There was one outstanding question of would they be receiving a recording of this? Yes, you will. Look for it in about 5 days. And other than that, this concludes the presentation. We want to thank you for attending, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in another webinar soon. Thanks, ladies.